Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, the Mai Pei Beis Halachet Dalit. We're going to be learning Daf Chav Beis, starting on Daf Chav Beis Amadal of 2 lines from the top by the 2 dots Hachen Venin. Quickly reviewing the 3 categories that the Mishnah spoke about. The baker, that the Mishnah was Machadesh, that loichivu oisam chachamim lahafrish elo kedei trumas meiser v'chala. And as we mentioned, guys, all the steps. Step number 1 is that generally, when it comes to machalos asurais, all of the obligation of making sure what you're eating is kosher is on the eater or on the buyer. Tevel is different. The Torah is machayev, the owner, the grower, the farmer, whoever has current possession of tevel to be mafresh trumas umaisis. However, this is when it's tevel vaday. Generally, the chachamim follow the system that the Torah creates. So when the chachamim made a gzeira of the mai, yes, the mai is also an obligation. Whatever needs to be tied, the trumas meiser and the meiser sheni, it goes on the seller. However, as we said, the Mishnah gave exceptions. So the baker in the Mishnah was the most amazing exception, in which some of the obligation remains on the baker, the seller. The baker, as we said, bought the raw material from an Amaretz. The baker is selling it to a chaver. That's how we concluded in the Gemara in Daf Chav Beis on top of the Amit, and Daf Chav Aleph on the bottom. Nevertheless, when it comes to Trumas Meiser, the way we explained the Mishnah, the Pnei Moshe Darash Serilio, since the government would put a lot of pressure to keep the prices of bread very low, which means there was very little profit. So therefore, Meiser Sheni, which is a much larger amount, it's 10%, that is on the buyer. Masha'en came Trumas Meiser, which is a relatively much smaller amount, it's really 1%, that remains on the baker, the seller. And of course, Challah, the whole chiyuv of challah, which is the chiyuv do'iraisa, begins when the item is in the possession of the baker. That is also on the baker, on the seller. That is category number 1 in the Mishnah, and we concluded that yesterday. Now, the Mishnah then gave 2 more categories. The chenvini, the Mishnah used a lashon rabim, the chenvanim, right? Shopkeepers. Shopkeepers must separate all of the demai separations. All right? They may never sell demai. And then the 3rd category in the Mishnah was sintoinois, which means a wholesaler. The Mishnah then added the word umoichrei tevua. And as we interpreted yesterday, that will be very important to have the whole sugya today. Sintoinois is a professional wholesaler. Moichrei tevua can be someone like me or like you. Either it's a retailer or it's tama balabas. But it could be, that for whatever reason, you or I got hold of a lot of tevua, and we decided to sell it like wholesalers sell it. Not to sell it bit by bit, but to sell it all in one go, which means that proportionally we'll be making less profit per pound, but we'll make one turnover. And like a wholesaler, the Mishnah mentioned both that centoinois, or moichrei tevua, they are mamish allowed to sell the mai. When we learned the Mishnah, we said because they make very little profit, and therefore we put it on the buyer. We're going to really dive into that at the end of today's daf. But I just wanted to give this recap. So we have the baker, the chenvini, the moichrei tevua. The Gemara today on Daf Chav Beis, guys, will begin to expound the law of the chenvini, that we said that a storekeeper must separate all of the demai separations. And what's going to be very unique in today's daf is that there is really a debate, a underlying debate in the Gemara here as to what is Rav Meir's opinion in the following. Now, guys, there are 2 versions, Beshitas Rav Meir, who has a machlokes with the Chachamim. There is a braisa that the Gemara is going to conclude, very bekitzedik, that the braisa that we'll begin today's daf with is non-authoritative. We will actually prove that the braisa that I'm going to mention in a moment is non-authoritative by quoting a Mishnah. Challenge is, you'll see in the Mishnah, you have 2 versions. Min hakotza el hakotza. What is the question? The first beginning understanding Beshitas Rav Meir is that when the Mishnah says, when there is this opinion, that a wholesaler is allowed to mamish sell the mai, Rav Meir is the one that says that that's only a heter on a professional wholesaler. In other words, if you are a professional wholesaler, you were given that heter. But if you're not a professional wholesaler, even if you de facto, for whatever reason, got hold of a lot of tfuah, you got hold of a lot of grain, and you are selling it a one-time thing like a professional wholesaler. You found out that in the wholesaler market, a ton is sold for X amount of money. Even if you are actually selling it like a wholesaler, you have no such heter. The Chachamim, according to this initial version of this machlokes, has the opposite opinion, that I don't care if you're a professional or not. I look at how the sale is being made, whether you're making a lot of profit proportionally per pound, whether you're making a little profit, and that will be the determining factor. That's one initial version of Rav Meir versus the Chachamim. The Gemara is going to prove, now what we will always be aiming is for our Mishnah to be following Rav Meir, which is a rule. I know there are exceptions, but Stam Mishnah Rav Meir is a rule that we learned a lot in the Bavli. Really, all of the great Talmidim, right, all of the Braises ultimately followed Rabbi Akiva, including, and his Talmidim, which includes Rabbi Meir. Okay. The Gemara is going to prove from our own Mishnah that no, that our Mishnah cannot be following Rav Meir with that understanding. We will actually accept and show that the opposite understanding of the machlokes Rav Meir and the Chachamim is the authoritative machlokes, which is the opposite of what we mentioned, and we're going to repeat this again when we learn it inside. This is very interesting. In other words, is the heter on the wholesaler? A wholesaler doesn't have to separate anything. Is it if you're the professional, or is it how are you selling it right now? Two opinions, Rav Meir and the Chachamim, and we will determine who is the one that says what, ultimately coming to the understanding that our Mishnah is following the real Shitas Rav Meir after we establish what Rav Meir actually holds. I just want to ask, yes.
With the halachas of challah, there's a difference between, let's say, a home baker and a professional baker. Would this machlokes go in line with challah as well? Like if I'm a home baker,
no.
I'm doing a challah bake for 800 people.
Got it. Interesting. Okay, so just to point out like this, that even though we don't practice it right now, but whenever challah has to be separated on a biblical level, which is not yet the case, the din is that there's a difference between a baker and a balabas as to the quantity. Echad mi chavdalad or echad mi memches. That's what the Rabbi is mentioning over here. So maybe he's suggesting that this machlokes Rav Meir and the Chachamim, regardless who says what, logically can apply there also. Correct. Could be. I don't know then. We're not talking about challah at all today, which is in other words, a big bulk of today's daf will be around this topic. For whatever reason, there's a heter on the wholesaler. Is it on the professional or is it on the one who's doing it like right now you're making a wholesaling sale? And the same thing with the shopkeeper. Do you have to be a professional shopkeeper? Fakir to be chayiv to separate it all? Or what happens if a wholesaler happens to sell the remnant of what he has like a shopkeeper, selling it by a little bit at a time? The Gemara is going to, this is the whole daf today. It's Gavaldik. Okay. Now, when it comes to the shopkeeper, that the shopkeeper must separate all of the mai, both the trumas maisen and the maiser sheni. There is a machlokes b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. There's a machlokes in what Rabbi Yechanan said. There can be two different reasons. One of the reasons we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah yesterday, and that is because the wholesaler is making less profit, so therefore the Chachamim threw it on the buyer. Let the guy make a living. The shopkeeper is selling smaller amounts, a retailer, but he's earning proportionally more per pound. So the shopkeeper, has to be the one separating it. That's one of the reasons. There's another reason. The other reason is because children would buy from shopkeepers and children would never buy from wholesalers, practically. And being that a child is someone upon whom you cannot be mechayiv to do anything, so there's a greater responsibility on the shopkeeper to separate all of the Trumas Meiser and the Meiser Sheni to make sure that a child won't eat or bring home the mai versus on the wholesaler. Interesting svarim. Especially since, even when it comes to chinuch, however we understand chinuch, to be meichel, not kosher, be yadayim, is something that we're for sure not allowed. It means even when children are under an age where you don't have to stop them, like by Chilul Shabbos, if they're Mechalel Shabbos on their own, right? So if a child is very young, if he opens and shuts the lights, you don't have to stop him. He doesn't understand that he's doing anything wrong. But for you to take your 2-year-old and bring him to the switch, right, via dime to get him to open or to close it, that's something that's not allowed. So are we concerned about the children or not? And we're going to see nafkaminas between the understanding in the reason why Yechen v'Nima separated all. It's a fascinating daf. It's very short, but it's good that, the way the pagination, just to the Ois V'Hadar, we're learning a daf, a shir. It just makes the learning of these new topics for us easier because we can go through it a bit slower and therefore take it in a bit better. Okay, let's go right inside. Chevra daf Chav Beis Amud Aleph by the 2 dots. The baker we finished yesterday. We have the chenvenin, and then we have the sitoinois umaychrei tibur. So the Mishnah writes that hachenvenin ein l'b'shaim limker demai. In other words, the storekeeper has to separate the way normally it works by tevel / demai. The trumas meiser and the meiser sheni has to be separated by the shopkeeper. Now, chavrayi b'shem Rabbi Lazar da Amoira. The chavra means the scholars, the bnei yeshiva. Said in the name of Rabbi Lazar, our Mishnah follows Rav Meir. The beauty here is, where the Yerushalmi is mekatzed, and we have to add so many words, is that really, we will see, there's a debate in between the lines here in the Gemara. What exactly did Rav Meir say? So that's how getting this clear will allow us to go through this flawlessly without getting confused. The Rav Meir Omar, now this the Rav Meir Omar actually will turn out to be what the Chachamim say. But that's the initial understanding. The initial understanding is that Rav Meir is saying, listen to these words, Lo hitiru limkar demai elo l'sitain bolvad, that the heter the Mishnah gave on the wholesaler is not about how the actual sale is happening, but it's about the profession of the seller. That if the seller is a wholesaler, that's the only thing we look out. For the wholesaler, we have such a heter. Now, why are we saying that? Now, the logic behind why we are saying it, and why did the Chavraya come to that conclusion, even though the Mishnah clearly, our Mishnah, in the next clause, says the opposite. We know that because when you focus on the Chenvanim, and this is a point that I'm going to make that won't be addressed in the Gemara. This is all in between the lines. Why did the Mishnah speak about a chenvani? Chenvani is a shopkeeper. If it's about how the actual sale is taking place, this is the logic behind the Chavrai, B'Shem Rabbi Lazar. Don't speak about a shopkeeper. Speak about selling in a small amount. Now, guys, I know that I mentioned this yesterday. I looked ahead a little bit. Tomorrow, the Mishnah will define a small amount, chenvani, and a large amount. So we're not going to get into this right now. In other words, there is an objective, there is a clear quantity of, that's called a smaller amount, as is sold in retail, and that's a large amount. That's halachically called a wholesale sale. Wholesale. The Mishnah didn't speak about quantity, which will be daka, gasa. We'll have these words soon in the Braisas. Daka means little bit, gasa means a lot. No, the words is chenvini. So that was the base of this first opinion, which will be refuted right away, is that since the Mishnah is not speaking about small amounts, large amounts. When you smell a small amount, then the seller has to be mafresh. When you sell a large amount, the buyer has to be mafresh. The Mishnah doesn't say it. The Mishnah says a storekeeper. It sounds like the only key determining factor is the profession of the one doing the sale, not actually what's happening. Guys, a storekeeper can sell wholesale if he has to. No, we're looking at the profession. So his version is Rav Meir was the one that says we care about the profession, not about the actual sale. So it's good. So our Mishnah comes like Rav Meir. And the Gemara is right away going to refute the Chavrayu B'Shem Rabbi Lazar. Amazingly, the Mishnah will end up to be like Rav Meir. But you got the wrong understanding of what Rav Meir said. If you think you got what Rav Meir said, that we look at the profession, and you want to be medayik, that since the Mishnah said chenvini, which you can explain, diver hakosav b'hoiva, so to say, who sells small amounts? A shopkeeper. That would work. It's not a raya. It sounds like it. It's mashma. The Mishnah explicitly, in the next clause, when the Mishnah speaks about the wholesaler, the Mishnah didn't only mention sitoinos, right? Sitoinos means a wholesaler. The Mishnah said two words. Look in the Mishnah. See toinois u'moichlei tevua. Moichlei tevua means dafka the opposite. Moichlei tevua means that even if you're not a wholesaler, if right now you are making a wholesale because you're a balabas and you got a gift from 10 people, or you bought a lot of retail, you never noticed you bought it, your wife bought it, all of a sudden you open up your closet, you see this huge amount. That's what no moichlei tevua means. So Hasav Rabbi Yoi say, no, if you think you got Rav Meir right, and you're making Azaz Diuk and the Chenveni, the profession, the Mishnah actually, if you think you understand Rav Meir, our Mishnah that argues with Rav Meir. Why? Because it says in the Mishnah, these are quoting the words of our Mishnah, Halacha Dalet. Sitoinus is a professional wholesaler, and then the Mishnah writes, Moichlei tevua. Moichlei tevua means someone who's not a professional wholesaler, but he's doing a sale of he's doing a wholesale. So have is chayranin. In other words, there are other people other than the professional wholesaler that is allowed to sell without separating anything. Why? Because we look, our Mishnah follows the opinion, whoever said it. We don't look at the profession. We look at how the sale is happening. Is it a retail? Is it a small amount or is it a large amount? We're going to call a small amount a shopkeeper sale, and we're calling a sale of a large amount as a wholesale sale. Okay. So first of all, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that our Mishnah, if this would be the understanding, cannot be Rav Meir, the Chevraya who quoted Rabbi Lazar, we misunderstood them. It's beautiful what the Gemara is saying. The Chevraya quoted Rabbi Lazar. We're not saying Rabbi Lazar didn't say it. The Gemara is saying that since our Mishnah cannot follow Rav Meir if you got Rav Meir right, which you didn't, first of all, the Chevraya b'shem Rabbi Lazar were making the statement on a braisa that's read it inside. Amar Rabbi Yosi, Daf Chav Beis Amad Aleph, says Rabbi Yosi that loy al hado Rabbi Lazar Amar hado milsa. It was not in our Mishnah that we are quoting b'shem Rabbi Lazar. It follows Rabbi Meir. No, el aladot regarding a braisa. The Tani we learned in a braisa by Medvaram Amurim. This braisa is speaking about the baker. The baker is someone that has one leniency, which is the baker does not have to separate Ma'aser Sheni. And on that says the Braisa, when is that? Only if he's selling it in his bakery store, or by the door of his bakery store. In other words, he's selling it in public, and we're going to go with what we learned yesterday in the Pnei Moshe Darashadilio, that the government would keep their eyes on the bakers. Bread is a staple food. They would make sure the prices are low, and any sale that happened in public, those prices were controlled. And because of that, we were mated at least for the Ma'aser Sheni, for the baker not to have the achrayis, put it on the buyer. Says the Beraisa, Aval im hoya moicher bepalter. But if a baker is selling it through a palter, versus does a palter, a palter. I know that many people say pas palter, right? Palter is a baker. No, the baker is a baker, and the palter is someone that would buy large amounts from a baker, but he would sell them individually in private. That's how we are understanding the whole part. In other words, it's someone, he doesn't even bake. He buys it from many. It's like a wholesaler. It's like a private business. The point is that the government could not regulate the palter. The palter taka would not have to sell it for very low prices. So he loses the heter of not having to separate Ma'aser Sheni. That's what the Braisa says. These are different ways that in the times of Chazal, people will sell bread in the private. I just want to give a throw out that we are learning this Bill Hashgacha Pratis in Los Angeles. There's something new here called the LA outlets, right? That's also LA outlets is a whole new system where mamish like a palter. Things are being sold. They're being sold more in private. Happens to be that they're selling things for a normal price without charging whatever the prices are, without getting into all that. Point is, the Braisa says that if the actual sale is happening in private, then you lose the heter. Ma'aser alakol. Okay, now that's a Braisa. It was regarding this brayse that alei chavraya b'shem Rabbi Lazar. This brayse is Rabbi Meir. In other words, we don't say that since he usually sells it in public, he's exempt. We don't say since he usually sells it in public, since that's his profession, he's exempt. We are saying that if your actual sale right now is discreet, we look at the actual sale. If right now it's discreet, you lost your exemption. In other words, we don't look at your profession. Fakir. The Braisa is following an approach that we look at what's happening right now. The heter on the baker is only because you're selling it in public, so there was pressure to lower the prices. The moment the same person sells it in private, in other words, he's selling it through a palter, there's more profit being made. You got to do meiser sheni. So now it's the opposite. The Chavraya are saying b'shem Rabbi Lazar, whose opinion is that? Rav Meir. In other words, there was already the Havamin of the Gemara was based on the misunderstanding of what Rav Meir said. Everything flips now. You gotta really, Rav Meir is the one that says we don't look at the profession. We look at how it's actually being sold. The Braisa clearly is following that opinion. By the way, like the Sefer of our Mishnah, that says that the heter of the wholesaler isn't only on the Sintoinos, it's also on the Moichrei Tevua. We look at what's happening right now.
So what do the Chachamim hold?
The Chacham hold the opposite. The Chacham hold that the category of a baker, it's about the category. A shopkeeper always has to give off the Trumas Meiser and Meiser Sheni, even if the shopkeeper happens to be making a wholesale. And you look at the profession. It's like a loy plug, Danny. It's all the Rabbanan, so they put it on this category. Rav Meir doesn't put it on the category. That Rav Meir goes to every single case. Okay, now frag the Gemara. Hold on. Hey, day Rav Meir. No, the Gemara is shocked because the Gemara up until this Rabbi Yossi statement understood Rav Meir said the opposite. They thought Rav Meir says it's on the professional. It's about the profession. Now you're saying, no, it's on the way the sale is happening. Where do you find that in Rav Meir? Now, the reason why the Gemara is asking the question, this is so rich. We're going to quote a Mishnah we're going to learn tomorrow. We're going to we'll see in the Mishnah, you look inside, you'll see there's two opposite versions of who said what. The one who asked the question, which Rav Meir, had the reading of the Mishnah, Daf Chav Gimel, the opposite of the way the Gemara is going to quote it. The Gemara is, in other words, you see already from the beginning, there was certain Mishnayos, and that in the Gemara, the Amoraim didn't know what the right words. Min hakotz el hakotz. Answers the Gemara, what do you mean, which Rav Meir? That Ahid, the Tanin Labasrei, the next Mishnah. The Mishnah we're going to learn tomorrow. What is it? Now we're quoting this version of the Mishnah. Rav Meir Oimer, Shedarkoi Limadei. Guys, the words beans were sold small quantities at a time. The way it normally worked, that's called darkoi limade, something that's sold in small measure. Wheat generally was sold in large measure. Limaded begasa, limaded bedaka. Gasa means a lot, daka means a little. Beans, we're going to see this tomorrow. Beans is shadarke limaded bedaka. We're going to read that tomorrow. Now we're quoting the second case of the Mishnah, according to our correct, authoritative version, that items that shedarkoi limaded begasa, things that are normally sold in large amounts, which is wheat, what happens if actually after a one time an anomaly umidade bedaka? What happens if now you sold it in a small amount? Now, what did we learn in our Mishnah? Allah Chadalad, Kavan. Small amounts, chenveni, have to give everything. Wholesalers, large amounts, are exempt from separating any demai. So what the Mishnah now is speaking about, something which is normally sold in large amounts, right? What happens if you sell it in a small amount? You see, there's two different gears. So tfela gasa lidakam, which means that we look at what's actually happening. You're selling it in a small amount, If you're selling it in a small amount, you now are like the shopkeeper. You, the seller, has to separate everything, not the buyer. If this is the way to read the Mishnah, if this is the way to read the Mishnah, which it is, it comes out that Rabbi is the one that holds that we don't say, since this is a produce that's normally sold in large quantities, normally things that are sold in large quantities, the buyer has to be mafresh. Rav Meir doesn't look at how things are usually done, which is connected to the professional. A professional usually does the way his profession tells for him to do. Rav Meir looks at what's actually happening. This is the right version, B'shitas Rav Meir. So therefore, the Chavraya said, B'shem Rabbi Lazar, that when the Braisa spoke about the baker, that if a baker sells it in private, that baker has to even give Meiser Sheni. That's the Rav Meir that it's following. Beautiful. Turning now to the Avchav Beis, Omid Beis. It's mamish gavaldik. And indeed, Tana Rab Chia came. In other words, we know we are acknowledging that there was a doubt really now. When they compiled the Yerushalmi, the Olam, they were debating. 1 second, you could have read the Mishnah the other way around. You saw the parentheses. You could have read the Mishnah the other way around. I'll prove it to you from a Braisa of Rab Chia that this is the right version, B'shitas Rav Meir. And here we go, the Braisa of Rab Chia. Same version. Something, even if it's something that's normally sold in large quantities, which is wheat, which means normally it's sold as a wholesale. If this sale was done bidaka, now you sold it with a small measure. Now again, I know there are two versions here also. But we're going to follow the gears of Tfeila Gasa Lidaka. We look at the Daka. Daka means the seller has to separate. Daka is the din of a chenveni, even if he's not a professional chenveni. This guy is a wholesaler. All he does is he sells boatloads of wheat. Doesn't matter. If you make a small sale, what's small? We'll see tomorrow. There is an actual measurement. If it's called a small quantity sale, so then that sale is under the rule of the chenveni. And that is Rav Meir, by the way. Okay. And v'chein, palter midodaka, a palter who the same rule will be that if he sells a small amount, or selling a small amount in private, guys, means this actual sale will be a sale in which he'll make more profit. And according to Rav Meir, he's going to have to separate everything. Or v'chanus, the same thing with the store. You can own a store, and for whatever reason, you have a cash crunch. You need cash flow. A storekeeper can go ahead and he can take a large amount of merchandise and sell it to another wholesaler just to get the capital. So v'chanus midagasa, the rule is this is the way Rab Chia has the version of Rabbi Meir. That's Felehi Hagasa Ladaka. We look at how it's being done. We look at the actual and not at the category. And like I mentioned, the beauty now is it turns out that our Mishnah is Rav Meir. It's the end of the day is we would prefer for our Mishnah to follow Rav Meir. Our Mishnah follows Rav Meir, but not from the case of the Chendini. From the Chendini, you don't see anything. Our Mishnah follows Rav Meir from the fact that in the third category in our Mishnah, Sitoinus Umoichrei Tuvua, who says Moichrei Tuvua is exempt from all of the Demai separations, only Rav Meir. Gevaldi. Okay. Now, why is it that the Chendini who sells in small amounts, and the way we clarified with Rav Meir, even if you're not a Chendini, but if you're making a Chendini type of sale, small amounts, you have to separate Trumas Meiser and Meiser Sheni. Why? Why are we putting it on the seller? So I know what we said in the Mishnah stands, but we're going to have two reasons, and we'll see there's an afkamina between these two reasons. Amazingly, both of them were said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, and I want you to know it could be he said both. It's not a machlokes what Rabbi Yechanan said. Could be both reasons are right, but there is an afkamina between one and the other. So Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. Why is it that the Chendini has to separate all of the Demai separations? Guys, let's remember these words. We don't want for children to eat tevel. Meaning, children won't buy from a wholesaler. Can an adult, can we here in Los Angeles go to downtown and go into these stores and buy a gray market perfume? They'll sell it to you. But children don't go there. In other words, that's the way it works. Even though it's common, guys, people that are trying to save a couple of dollars, if you go to a wholesaler and you buy a small amount, could be he doesn't have the infrastructure for you. He doesn't have the overhead for you. Why not? He'll sell it to you for a discounted price. These things can happen. But children don't go there. In other words, we're never concerned that a child will buy from a wholesaler. It doesn't work that way. Children can buy from stores. A child won't be mafresh anything. He's a child. Especially since the rule of tevel, unlike kashrus, is that when it comes to tevel doiraisa, the buyer is never concerned if the seller is a chaver that there's any issue, because the obligation of tevel is on the seller. So if a child is going to buy from a chenveni, the child is not going to be mafresh. He'll end up eating. That's why the Chachamim says that a chenveni has to be mafresh all of the demai separations. And that's why the wholesaler does not. That's one statement that was made by Rabbi Yechanan. We're going to call it Chavraya's opinion, even though it's all in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi La b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. So we're just going to call the shit of Rabbi Ila or Rabbi La. No, what we said when we learned the Mishnah. That means the daka, when you sell in small measure, when you sell a small amount, that's the way things work. If you sell, you're making the same effort. If you're selling a smaller amount, the seller is going to be earning proportionally more profit per pound, per item. Since the seller is the one that has a larger amount of profit, so that's why we go back to the general rule of tevel, that all of the trumas u'maisres is on the seller to separate. The seller has to separate. In our case, it's the mai, the trumas maiser and the maiser sheni. But when you're selling a large amount, you see the emphasis is not you're a wholesaler. If right now you're selling a large amount, the buyer is the one that has a greater amount of profit. Halikeach will be the one that's mafresh. Okay, look inside the Pnei Moshe. What we're going to do is, since it's relatively, we have time, everything that we said now is the Pnei Moshe's understanding. There is another nuance, B'shitas Rabbi Ila, that the Rambam doesn't accept what we just said right now, and we're going to learn the Pnei Moshe. Then I'm going to speak out the Rambam, and then if we have time, we're going to go through the next couple of lines and showing how it can go either like the Pnei Moshe or like the Rambam. Really, it's not a just machlokes. Pnei Moshe is an achron, the Rambam is addition. But let's go with the Pnei Moshe. That's what we have. Pnei Moshe is in the middle of the right column. It's like 60 lines from the top, 50 lines from the top. Divrei hamaschel mido dako hoyel b'hamoichin mistaken. Right, that's Rabbi Ila's explanation b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. That what? That kishemoichin ma'at ma'at, when you sell a little piece at a time, mistaken hamoichin b'yosin, the seller is making more profit proportionally. And therefore, right? It sounds like it has to do with just the way, by the way, this is the way of the world, right? The markup of a wholesaler is much smaller, Kevin, than the markup of a retailer. When you sell wholesale, is the one that's mistaken. Why? Because he's paying less money per pound. He's paying less money per item. Lefikach has to be the one that's mad. Okay, guys, this is beautiful. If we would be in a rush, we would just go through the next couple of lines with this, but we have time. So let's learn another layer in the Shita of Rabbi Ila. And let me tell you by heart what the Rambam writes in the Perush HaMishnayos. And this is based on statements that Chazal make in the Bavli in various places. When a retailer sells, this is the way it worked. They would sell things exact, which means they wouldn't add to the sale. That means when you buy a pound in a retail store, how much does the seller give you? A pound. The seller doesn't give you anything in addition. The minhag of wholesaling is that if I'm buying, let's say, 100 pounds from a wholesaler, he would purposefully add a little bit to it. That means that he would, if they would have a measure, that's the way it worked then. that means a barrel that in it fits whatever, they would heap it on top. I want you to know that when you heap something on top, if it's, we're not talking about liquid will spill out. But when it comes to solids, there is a nice amount, I think it's a third, there's a large amount of heapings that you can do, before it begins to spill over. Wholesalers would sell bahar chavim. That means that whatever the price is, the wholesaler would add something to it. That's the way that Rambam understands it. So there would be even less profit. That's why, the way that Rambam will understand the whole sugya over here, the Chazal says that the wholesaler doesn't have to separate anything. In other words, it's not just the way the Pnei Moshe is writing, because the markup of the retailer is bigger. You can also argue that to keep the customer coming back, Kavan is writing, the retailer also might have had that culture. That's not the way they did it. In a retailer, not only is the markup bigger, that Rambam emphasizes not that point, because maybe the counterpoint to that is, I know this from retail. Retail, the square footage rental is a lot more expensive. The type of upkeep, the workers, the investment in the product is much greater. You have to display it better. You're selling less at a time. In other words, there's a reason why retailers charge more money. Maybe that's why the Rambam didn't just go with what the simplicity of the Pnei Moshe. It's not a contradiction, but the emphasis of the Rambam is that retailers would give you exactly what you bought. Wholesalers, that's the culture. They would always add something. When you add something to counter that, Chazal says, Oy bazoi, you buyer, you have to separate the Trumas Meiser and the Meiser Sheni. And you know what? It's 5 to 7. It's all the same. It's not all the same. We're going to continue reading according to this added layer of the Rambam. It's beautiful. Okay. For people that ever had a business, you should appreciate this. I know by my father for sure. Yeah, he would. You always rather add a little bit than subtract a little bit to keep the customer happy. Correct. But retail, everything is exact. You buy a soap, you got a soap. When you get a container, the seller adds something. That's the way that Rambam understands it. So wholesalers are exempt from Demai because they already added something. Let the buyer remove it from that addition. The retailer gives you exact. So we go back to the default rule by Tevel, even though it's only Medrabanan, that the seller is responsible to sell something that's fully tied. Okay. So we have a machloikis. Listen, machloikis amoyroim b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. The whole daf today is this way. So first of all, the Gemara is going to show you that I'm going to find two braises. It's amazing, this. And each one will back up a different understanding b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. There's going to be a braisa that's going to substantiate Chavraya. There's going to be a braisa that's going to substantiate Rabbi Ila. And the Gemara is going to show you that there are nafkeminois. There are differences between which one. There'll be actual consequence. Okay. So first of all, the Gemara says, I have a braisa that supports, let's say, the Chavraya. And I have a braisa that supports Rabbi Ila. And let's go. I know it's all B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan, so it's not to get confused. We're just going to quote the Chavraya. And now we're quoting the following braisa. Nechemya Omar Eshu Tafel Daka Kidaka. The Eshu Tafel Gasa Kidas. So we're speaking here about a merchant that actually measured out. He measured out most of his chayda. Let's go with the Rambam, the way a retailer does with exact measure. And then at the end, this is so common, he has some leftovers and he wants to just get rid of it. So the last sale is the way a wholesaler sells it. Let's go with the Rambam, that he gives it heaping. He gives it with generosity. How do you judge that last sale? It's really connected to the first topic of today's daf. Do you look at his profession or do you look at the actual sale? Or in the opposite, the Eshu Tafel Agasa, that means a guy was selling heaping, and at the end, the guy has 3 pieces left. 3 pieces he's going to charge for 3. The end was sold without heaping. So how do you judge the final sale? So let's read the way if you have a beard hagra, which we have over here, look inside, mamish 3 lines before the bottom, all the way in the Ksad Yad Aleph, on the left column, all the way at the end. So afilo hache he tfelo ledaka b'tzarech lahaprish ala hakoil. In other words, we're speaking about someone that he sells with measure. At the end, he sold heaping. What does the Braisa say? The final sale, he has to separate. He has to separate. Hold on a second. If the reason why we give a chumrah, Jono, on the retailer is because he sells it precise, but the moment he sells it heaping, he doesn't have to separate it. So this guy should not have to separate on the final heaping sale. Why are we saying that this guy, even though the last sale was heaping, he has to separate it? It's because of the tenoikas. That was the chavrayim. A guy that sells with measure, that's the guy from whom children go buy. That's the way it works. Children buy, you send your kid to buy from a retailer. You don't send your kid to buy from a wholesale. So that makes sense. In other words, since this is a person that there's a possibility that a child will end up buying on behalf of his parents merchandise from a guy that sells bidaka, so there's always the chashash that the tinoikas will end up with that produce. Always he has to tithe. Even though on this sale, he's giving you more than you paid for. No, it's the logic by saying that we don't look at the actual sale. We look at the profession. How do you normally sell? If you normally sell ledaka, kedaka. If you normally sell legasa, even though it's tafel legasa means that you normally sell heaping. Now you're selling, you only have 2 pieces. You sell each one, you pay for each one. We don't look at the actual sale. We look at how you normally sell it. Why would we look at, this is really a logic behind the whole thing we began today, whether it's Rav Meir, whether it's the Chachamim. Like, why would you look at the profession? Now it makes sense. Because the ikir is about the tinoikas. From a professional storekeeper, children can buy. From a professional wholesaler, children will not buy. So in other words, this braisa, this logic only works in the chavraya. Now, masnisa masayel and Rabbi. Rabbi is the one that we quoted when we learned the Mishnah. It's all about the money, about the profit. That what? The Tani, Rabbi Shmuel, that what? Mamish the opposite. That if you sold something, this sale was done bidaka, this sale was done exact. Let's go with that Rambam. You didn't add anything, even though you are a wholesaler, which means children won't buy from you. Nevertheless, if you're making more profit, you have to do it. Fakir. And afilu loy madad loy ella sa'avirayvan. In other words, you had a lot of merchandise. Guys, a roiva means, a roiva is 1/24 of a saw. Because you're a wholesaler. You sold a saw, this big amount. Then you had a little bit left. So Rabbi Shmuel holds that when you sell the little amount, since this was sold with a measure, a child will never buy this from you. Someone who sells these large amounts are not people that are equipped to service children. We look at the actual. Why do we care about the actual? Because it's about the profit. That backs up the understanding of Rabbi Ilah b'Shem Rabbi Yechanan. And now the Gemara is going to give you another nafkamina between these two understandings in the Mishnah. Which is if the seller, who's a wholesaler, actually, let's go with the Rambam, that the seller didn't heap. What happens if the seller, the wholesaler, cheap guy, I bought a saw, but he gave it to me, le'inyan revoyin, according to what I mean, he sold it to me the way people smell small amounts. Means actually, he was a precise sale. Hoyel b'hamoicher mistaken. With the Rambam, right? Moicher mistaken means because he didn't give the addition. Hamoicher mafresh. Right? And guys, this only goes with the Children don't buy. I want to make it clear. Children don't buy. They would not say this. If you would go with the Chevrayin, you would argue with this. This is only according to Rabbi Ila. That's the pshat. Hamoicher mafresh, what Rabbi Zeira means, according to Rabbi Ila b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, the moicher is mafresh. According to the Chavrayim b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, no, the moicher won't be mafresh. The lekeach will be mafresh. A lekeach doesn't go to this guy that sells these amounts, or in the opposite direction. Let's go with the Rambam. The seller, for whatever reason, is a retailer. He's a retailer, but he heaps everything. He heaps. The sale is heaped, which means the seller is not making money. Hoil v'halikeach is the one that's making money. Only according to Rabbi Ila, the lekeach will be mafresh. But according to the Chevrayin, even though the seller is not making any profit, the big profit, because he's heaping, he's adding, doesn't matter. Kids go there. Kids go there. The seller always has to do it. And really, it's a beautiful daf. Really, that's the underlying, whether Rav Meir said A or B, or Chachamim said A or B, that's really what's going on over here. Whether you look at the profession, or whether you look at the actual Gavaldik. Wow, Gavaldik. And now, in the next mission, we'll begin tomorrow, aside of we already quoted Rav Meir, we already know there's two versions. We're going to read it the way we read it today. We're finally going to learn what's called a large amount, what's called a small amount. That will be in the next mission. God willing to be continued.
What time tomorrow?
I don't know what time do you guys want to learn tomorrow. Tomorrow's I can learn the same time.
Same time.
Same time. We'll make a vote over here on the. You want the same time, Kevin? I'm fine with 6:15. Okay. All right.